we're going to learn how to do non-destructive editing here on our proving ground, basically through doing lots of duplicates, right? So I brought in an extra asset, which are these clouds. I brought them in from Pixabay, some large clouds, right? And I am just going to immediately rasterize it and then immediately just crop it down so I don't save all of that extra pixel information. Now, a basic way a texture overlay works is you just take away opacity and look, now there's a whole bunch of clouds in my scene. But because I have control of them, I can erase away with a large eraser at a soft opacity those clouds from the middle ground and just have them kind of build up in the foreground and background. And it helps everything to blend and kind of match a little bit closer. But we'll get back to the texture overlay. For now, let's look at other ways we can deal with lighting direction. Actually, I kind of need that atmosphere, so I'm going to... There we go. So I'll turn the texture overlay off for now, and now everything will just seem like way sharper than it needs to. But that's going to be our secret finishing technique at the end. Okay, so now, other ways to do shadows. We saw non-destructive overlay layers. I have one for my creature. I have one for the background in general. And then I have one for more of the background in general. And this one seems a little heavy-handed, honestly. So I'm going to take this one down in opacity. Okay, now what's another way we can make a drop shadow or a cast shadow underneath our creature? Well, now that I have this background, this gray, I can just use my lasso and take a chunk out of it and just draw where I think the shadow should be. Sometimes shadows are long, sometimes they're short. It has to do with the terrain and the direction of the lighting. And then from my gray, I'm just going to make a duplicate, Command J. And then I'm going to set it from overlay mode to normal mode. And then I'm going to set it to 100% opacity. So I can see what I'm looking at, right? Now I'm going to move that underneath my creature. So I've got the talons there. Okay, now there's a few options I have. Instead of going to overlay mode, I can just go to multiply mode. And now middle gray on multiply mode lets everything through, but is quite dark. And then I just take my opacity and I figure out, well, what's the shadow tone I want? But there is another benefit to this. And that's that you can change the color in multiply mode in a way that you can't really on a non-destructive overlay layer. So this is just middle gray. But if I go to my image adjustments and I go to color balance, I can shift that middle gray towards the blues or towards the yellows or towards the magentas. And I can make that shadow temperature match, which is really, really helpful. The only other thing I need to make match is the edge. So shadows, and you can see this by just putting your hand close to your tabletop, shadows are sharpest when they're nearest the thing that's casting the shadow. And then if you tilt your hand up, you'll see that the shadow just softens significantly. So the more space there is between the thing that's casting the shadow and the shadow, the softer their edge becomes. So how do we soften edges? Well, we use our eraser at 100% opacity. Maybe not this big, but 0% hardness, and you soften the edge. Right? Even on something as smooth as a rock, that shadow is going to only be sharp nearest the subject. All right, multiply. And now now that I have a darker shadow underneath my creature, right here, if I want to, I can burn it underneath my creature's talons. Oh, not that tool, the burn tool, not the smudge tool. And it will allow me to do that with quite a bit of subtlety. All right. So I just drew that shadow, right? And it makes a big difference. I think that helps. Now, sometimes you draw it a little wrong, and I did draw it a little wrong. You see how that shadow is going beyond the back of it. So then I'm going to take my lasso, and I'm zoomed in a whole lot here. And even though my creature's shadow is blocking the sun, it's not going to hit the mountains behind, right? So I need to trim that out, like so. But I'm zoomed in on tiny, tiny details. Oh, and I just erased it from the wrong layer. So there it is, this layer. There we go. All right. Now, is there any other thing I need to do? Like maybe I want to put this in a little bit of shadow, right? Or maybe I just want to burn that down a little bit. The problem is if I use my overall overlay, like this one, and I burn, because they're bright white, it's not going to make much of a difference. Even as I'm burning. So what I might need to do is what I did for the shadow on the creature. I might need to kind of cut a shape or even select it from the layer of this and then cut it out from the gray and then set it to multiply mode. And immediately, you see how it got rid of all those highlights. And then I can blend that out with my eraser, and I can also use opacity. So maybe it's catching a little bit of highlight, especially the reflective gold, but not much. And I can take that opacity down on my eraser too. And I can just take the overall opacity down and decide until it's more believable. But that looks better, I think, than without it, because it's in the shadow of these two stones. All right, now I think I'm ready for atmosphere. So I'm going to save my work. I've done all I can with the lighting and the direction. If I wanted to dodge, bring brightness to anything, I would just use the dodge tool. My setting was already so bright, I really didn't need to dodge much. But if I wanted to bring a little bit more highlights into the background, I could, like that mountain ridge, though I don't really want to. Or this side of the cliff, or even my creature's attributes. Right, like the edge of the wing. I have full control of all of this. With dodge and burn on my overlay layers. But it's easy to overdo. So always be aware of how strong what you're doing is and act accordingly. I'm going to burn a little bit back in. There we go. Okay. So now texture. This is going to be the thing that sells it all. Now we've come a long way just with the techniques we've done so far. This is where I opened it today. right there. And though the components are all the same, look how much everything kind of matches better now because of all the controlled lighting and the placement of the anatomy. But nothing can help as much as just washing it all with a similar texture. And then playing with that. So right now you can see that that added a lot of atmosphere. And then I can decide where that's sharpest and where that's darkest, right? Just by erasing away from it. But I can also play with its direct adjustments. I can use levels to darken it or lighten it. Whoops, I'm on the wrong layer. I can use eraser to erase away from it. So let's do that. So adjustments, levels. This is on the texture overlay itself. Do I want it to go lighter as a texture? And that works. Do I want it to go darker as a texture? That works. Do I want to find where it's just right? But what's so beautiful about texture overlays is they affect everything. So they help everything feel like it's treated by the same factors. So I went quite a bit darker with it. It's very moody, right? And now I'm going to go to color balance, and it's kind of magenta right now. I can decide, do I want it to go greener, more magenta? Do I want it to go bluer? This is in the midtones first. Cyan, more red. Kind of like the cyan, kind of like the blue. Now in the highlights, let's warm it up a little bit. These are the clouds, right? So I'm going to get rid of a lot of that red by pushing it a little bit more towards cyan. Green isn't quite what I want. I think I want to fight against the green. And then in the shadows, let's put some of those cools back in. There we go. So it's more purplish. Then I go back to the midtones and then adjust it there. And then see if I like what that color balance did, right? From there to there. These little shifts, and that's just in this texture overlay. Then the other thing that's nice about texture overlay, I'm going to make a duplicate and show it to you. Show it to you at 100%. This texture overlay is actually pretty sharp, right? So if I wanted to just soften its edges, I can go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. It's the only filter I require you know, because it's one that's really needed for artistic tools. It's like taking focus away. So Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And that will take the focus away using this slider. So you see how the edges are fairly sharp on those clouds. So if I wanted to soften it, I just Gaussian blur those pixels. See, so I have one that's blurred, and then I have one underneath it that's not blurred. And so now if I take this one down, it's going to be a little bit more natural than the sharp one underneath it. And yet still has all of those same benefits. This is it without it, right? This is it with it. So see if that can help yours out. And if there's any edges you just want to be a lot clearer, you just erase them with a low opacity soft edged eraser. And that's like blowing the clouds out of that area, like the mist out of that area, kind of clearing the air. All right, save. So once you've done everything you can to make sure that your proving ground is believable, you're ready to submit it. And I might look around the edges and make sure, because this would be something good for printing, make sure there's no clear things that need to be dodged and burned at the edges. I'm a little annoyed by the brightness of this rock right there. So I might go to my master non-destructive overlay layer and just burn that side a little bit on the midtones, an exposure of less than 30, just so there's not that bright spot kind of distract